The first thing the enemy learned about humanity was that none of their rules mattered. In a galaxy governed by perfect logic, wars were never truly chaotic. Every engagement followed the codex of conflict, a system refined over 10,000 years, where outcomes could be predicted with near-perfect accuracy. Fleets moved like equations. Strategies unfolded like clockwork. Victory wasn't fought for, it was calculated. And according to every calculation ever made, humanity should not have existed beyond its first interstellar war. Yet here they were. A single, fragile-looking fleet hung in the void at the edge of the Carthan expanse, dwarfed by the vast armada gathering before them. Hundreds of sleek alien warships formed perfect geometric formations, their alignment so precise it resembled a living machine. Each vessel moved in harmony, guided by predictive battle AIs that had never once been wrong. Across the stars, observers gathered, from the crystalline citadels of the Varelians to the orbital rings of the Thal Consortium. Entire civilizations tuned in to witness what would surely be a brief and educational conflict. Humanity had been warned, advised, even given access to the Codex itself. They had chosen to ignore it. They're still not forming standard engagement lines, one Thal analyst murmured, his voice rippling through a chamber of liquid light. They won't, another replied. Humans lack doctrinal discipline. That is not discipline, a Varelian strategist corrected coldly. That is extinction. On the central display, the human fleet drifted in loose, uneven clusters. Some ships were too far apart. Others were dangerously close together. Their formation, if it could even be called that, made no sense. And yet they did not advance. They waited. Inside the command vessel Horizon's Edge, Admiral Alara Vance stood in silence, her eyes fixed on the endless wall of enemy ships ahead. The bridge around her was calm, but not because of confidence, because of acceptance. We're inside their optimal firing envelope in 3 minutes, her tactical officer said quietly. I know, Alara replied. They're waiting for us to correct formation. A faint smile touched her lips. Good. The officer hesitated. Admiral, we still have time to... No, she said gently, cutting him off. If we play their game, we lose before the first shot is fired. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth, because every simulation had said the same thing. Follow the Codex, and humanity would be erased within 12 minutes. Across the battlefield, the enemy fleet began its final alignment. Massive ships rotated into precise vectors, their weapons charging in perfect synchronization. Every movement was efficient, elegant, inevitable. A voice echoed across all channels, translated instantly into every known language. Human fleet, you are in violation of Engagement Protocol 7. Correct your formation or be neutralized. Silence answered. On the human bridge, a young communications officer glanced nervously at Alara. Should we respond? Alara exhaled slowly, then shook her head. No. Seconds stretched. Across the galaxy, billions watched as the timer ticked down. 10, 9, 8. They're not moving, a Varelian observer whispered. Of course they are not, another replied. They are primitives. They do not understand what is about to happen. 5, 4, 3. Inside Horizon's Edge, Alara finally spoke, broadcast to all ships. Her voice was steady, calm, human. Remember, we're not here to win their way. A pause. We're here to survive ours. 2, 1. The enemy fleet fired. A wall of light erupted across the void, beams converging with mathematical perfection. Every shot was calculated to intersect, to overlap, to ensure nothing could slip through. It was flawless. It was unstoppable. And it hit. Nothing. Where the human fleet had been seconds before, there was only empty space. Across every observing system, confusion rippled instantly. They moved, a Thal analyst said, disbelief in his tone. But that maneuver, it wasn't possible within those parameters. They broke formation before the countdown ended, another added. That violates. The Codex, the Varelian strategist finished, his voice tightening. Yes, it does. On the battlefield, the human fleet had scattered. Not in retreat, not in panic, but in something far more dangerous: chaos. Ships accelerated in seemingly random directions, some diving directly toward the enemy, others veering off at sharp, unpredictable angles. Their movements defied every known combat pattern, making them impossible to track with conventional targeting systems. "They're desynchronizing their own fleet," an observer said, stunned. "Why would they do that?" "Because," the Varelian strategist whispered slowly, "we cannot predict what does not follow logic." Inside Horizon's Edge, alarms flared as enemy targeting systems struggled to reacquire locks. "Direct hits avoided," the tactical officer reported, barely containing his shock. "Minimal damage across all ships." Alara nodded once. "Good. Now let's make this even harder for them." "Admiral?" She turned, her expression calm but fierce. "Execute pattern break." The officer blinked. "That's not a recognized." "I know," she said softly. "That's the point." Across the fleet, human ships began transmitting conflicting signals, altering their signatures, and shifting their trajectories in ways that made no tactical sense. Some even powered down weapons entirely, only to reignite them seconds later at unexpected vectors. To any observer trained in the Codex, it was madness. To the enemy fleet, it was a nightmare. "They're generating false patterns," one alien commander said, his voice laced with something unfamiliar. "Uncertainty. Our predictions are failing. Request recalibration." "Denied," another replied sharply. "Maintain protocol. The system will adapt." But it didn't. For the first time in recorded history, the predictive engines hesitated, because humanity had done the one thing no species had ever dared to do. They ignored every rule. And in that moment, the battle stopped being predictable. On the human bridge, Alara allowed herself a single breath of relief. Then she leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "All right," she said. "Now the real fight begins." And far beyond the battlefield, as billions watched in stunned silence, a new, terrifying realization began to spread. If war could no longer be calculated, then humanity might be the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever seen. If you're already feeling the tension rising, make sure to like and subscribe to HFY Global Tales, because this battle is only getting started. The moment humanity broke formation, the war stopped behaving like a war. Across the observation networks, silence replaced certainty. Where there should have been clean projections and precise outcome curves, there was only noise, chaotic, unresolvable noise that no system could simplify. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Codex of Conflict had no answer. They destroyed predictive coherence, a Thal analyst whispered, his tendrils flickering erratically as streams of data collapsed across his display. "Our models can't stabilize." "That's impossible," another replied sharply. "All combat resolves into patterns." Not this one. On the main projection, the battlefield had become something unrecognizable. Human ships darted unpredictably, some accelerating into dangerously close proximity with enemy vessels, others drifting as if disabled before suddenly reigniting engines and veering away at impossible angles. There was no symmetry, no rhythm, no logic, and that was the problem. Inside the command core of the opposing fleet, Supreme Strategist Vakar stood motionless as the data streamed around him. His species had never lost a fleet engagement. They didn't need to. They solved them. Every battle was a question. Every answer already known. Until now. "Status," Vakar demanded. "Targeting solutions unstable," one of his subcommanders replied. "Enemy vectors are inconsistent." "Inconsistent is not a classification," Vakar said coldly. "Refine it." A pause. Then, reluctantly, "unpredictable." The word lingered in the air like a contamination. Vakar's eyes narrowed, then forced them into predictability. Titan engagement zones. Heard them. At once, the alien fleet shifted. Massive warships adjusted position with perfect coordination, forming layered containment fields designed to funnel the scattered human ships into controlled kill corridors. It was a textbook maneuver, elegant, proven, deadly. "They will have no choice," one commander said with quiet confidence. Their movement options will collapse into optimal lanes. But as the formation closed, humanity did something no simulation had prepared for. They didn't avoid the trap. They accelerated into it. What are they doing? A sub-commander snapped. On the projection, several human ships surged directly toward the tightening formation, diving into the very corridors designed to destroy them. They're entering maximum threat zones, another officer said. That's suicide. Vakar leaned forward slightly. No, he said slowly. They are making a choice. Inside Horizon's Edge, the bridge trembled as warning signals lit up across every console. We're moving into their densest firing grid, the tactical officer said. Survival probability just dropped below 20%. Alara didn't flinch. Good. The officer stared at her. Good. They're expecting us to avoid risk, she replied. That's how their entire system works. Every move we make is supposed to maximize survival. She stepped closer to the central display, watching as their ships plunged deeper into the enemy's carefully constructed trap. So what happens, she continued softly, when we don't? A beat of silence. Then, fire control, she ordered. Hold until manual mark. Manual, the officer repeated. Admiral, that bypasses. I know exactly what it bypasses. Across the human fleet, targeting systems, power down. Not malfunctioning. Not damaged. Deliberately disabled. They've gone dark, a Thal observer said, stunned. Their targeting AIs are offline. That's not possible, another replied. No species relinquishes computational advantage mid-battle. But humanity just had. Inside the alien command core, confusion spiked. They reduced their own combat efficiency, a sub-commander reported. Weapon accuracy will drop by 43%. Then this is their error, another said. Exploit it. But Vakar didn't respond immediately, because something about this felt wrong. They are not reducing efficiency, he said quietly. They are removing predictability. And then the human fleet opened fire. Not in synchronized volleys. Not in calculated waves. But in scattered, staggered bursts. Each ship firing at seemingly random intervals, targeting different points without coordination. To the Codex, it was nonsense. To the enemy targeting systems, it was catastrophic. They're disrupting firing solutions, a commander shouted. Our intercept calculations can't align. Incoming fire, once easily countered by precise defensive grids, now slipped through gaps that shouldn't have existed. Shields flared unevenly as impact struck at irregular intervals. Overwhelming systems designed for predictable patterns. That's inefficient, one alien officer insisted. They're wasting energy. No, Vakar said, his voice tightening for the first time. They're denying us structure. On the battlefield, the human ships continued their reckless advance, weaving through the tightening corridors with movements that bordered on irrational. Some ships took hits, real damage, real losses, but others slipped through impossibly narrow gaps, surviving where no model said they should. Inside Horizon's Edge, the tension was suffocating. We're taking heavy fire, the tactical officer reported. Hull integrity dropping across multiple ships. Ilara's gaze never wavered. Stay the course. Admiral, at this rate. I know exactly what this rate leads to, she said, her voice calm but unyielding. And so do they. She pointed toward the enemy formation. They think we're desperate. Another explosion rocked the ship. They think we're making mistakes. Warning alarm screamed. They think we're losing. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. Let them. Across the alien fleet, confidence began to stabilize. Despite the confusion, despite the disruption, the numbers were still in their favor. Human ships were taking damage. Some were being destroyed. The projections, fragmented as they were, still pointed to an inevitable outcome. Victory. They cannot sustain this, one commander said. Attrition will collapse their fleet. Yes, another agreed. Their chaos cannot last. But Vakar remained silent, because buried beneath the noise, something else was forming. Report, he said suddenly. A pause. Then, enemy velocity patterns are converging. The words triggered a flicker of unease across the command core. Converging. Vakar repeated. Yes, strategist. Their movements appear random, but when mapped over time, they are closing distance toward multiple central points within our formation. A new projection lit up, and for the first time, the chaos resolved into something terrifying. Not randomness. Design. They're not scattering, Vakar whispered. They're positioning. On the battlefield, human ships that had seemed isolated, disorganized, even reckless, were now aligning along hidden vectors, slipping deeper into the enemy's structure. Too deep. They've penetrated inner formation layers, a commander said, alarm rising. How did we not? Because we were looking for patterns, Vakar said, and they gave us none. Inside Horizon's Edge, Ilara watched as the final pieces fell into place. Signal all units, she said. Phase 1 complete. Her crew exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and rising hope spreading across the bridge. Admiral, are we actually? Not yet, she interrupted gently. Then her expression hardened. But now they're exactly where we need them. Outside in the cold expanse of space, the human fleet, battered, outnumbered, and still defying every known law of warfare, tightened its invisible grip. And for the first time since the battle began, the enemy fleet was no longer in control. For 10,000 years, no fleet had ever broken Protocol 1. Because Protocol 1 wasn't just a rule. It was the foundation of survival. Maintain formation integrity. Without it, fleets didn't just lose battles. They ceased to function. And yet, as the enemy fleet tightened its grip, as their ships aligned into perfect containment layers designed to crush humanity completely, the humans did something no one had ever seen before. They broke themselves apart. Report. Vakar demanded, his voice sharper now, cutting through the rising tension in the command core. Multiple human vessels are severing formation links, a subcommander replied, disbelief bleeding into his tone. They're disabling fleet synchronization systems. That's not possible, another officer snapped. Without synchronization, their coordination collapses. But the data didn't lie. Across the battlefield, human ships began dropping out of shared command networks, one by one, then in clusters, then in entire segments of the fleet. Communication lines went dark. Formation data vanished. Predictive signatures disappeared. They're isolating themselves, the subcommander said. Each vessel is now operating independently. Silence fell, because everyone in that room understood what that meant. No coordination, no unified strategy, no survival. Inside Horizon's Edge, the bridge felt different now. Quieter, heavier, as if something invisible had just snapped. Fleet link disengaged, the systems officer confirmed, his voice low. We're on our own. Ilara nodded slowly. Good. The officer stared at her. Admiral, with no shared data, we can't predict each other's movements. We could collide. Crossfire risk increases by. I know, she said gently. And so do they. She looked out at the battlefield, where human ships now moved like scattered sparks in the dark, each one alone, each one unpredictable even to its own allies. That's the point. Across the galaxy, observers struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. They've abandoned collective intelligence, a Thal analyst said, his voice trembling. Their efficiency just dropped below viable combat thresholds. This is not strategy, a Varelian strategist said coldly. This is collapse. But even as he spoke, something about the battlefield refused to fit that conclusion. Because the humans weren't collapsing. They were accelerating. Without synchronization, each ship moved on instinct, sharp, erratic maneuvers that no central system could have coordinated. Pilots made split-second decisions, reacting not to data models, but to the chaos unfolding around them. And in doing so, they became invisible to prediction. Inside the alien command core, alarms began to rise again. Targeting solutions failing across multiple sectors, a commander reported. Enemy trajectories are no longer correlating with any known behavior models. That's because there is no model, another replied, his voice strained. Each ship is acting independently. Vakar's gaze hardened. Then, adapt. Focus fire on isolated units. Eliminate them one by one. Yes, strategist. Across the fleet, alien warships adjusted, their precision returning as they locked onto individual human vessels. Without formation support, each ship became an easier target. Or, at least, that's what the Codex said. They're lining up single-target eliminations, the tactical officer aboard Horizon's Edge warned. We're being prioritized. Ilara didn't hesitate. Good. Let them. The officer blinked. Admiral? If they focus on one ship, she said quietly, they stop seeing the rest. As if on cue, a barrage of concentrated fire surged toward a lone human cruiser drifting near the edge of the formation. Every calculation was perfect. Every angle accounted for. The ship should have been erased instantly. Instead, it turned, not away, but toward the fire. That vessel is accelerating into the attack, an alien commander shouted. Why would they? The cruiser twisted at the last possible second, its engines flaring violently as it slipped through a gap that shouldn't have existed, using the incoming fire itself as a visual shield against targeting systems. It survived. Barely, but it survived. That maneuver had less than a 1% success probability, a subcommander said, stunned. And yet, Vakar murmured, they chose it anyway. Because, for humans, 1% was not zero. And that made all the difference. Across the battlefield, more ships began doing the same, diving into impossible scenarios, making decisions that no rational system would approve. Some failed. Explosions lit up the void as vessels were lost. But others succeeded. And every success broke the enemy's confidence just a little more. They are accepting losses, one alien officer said, his voice tight. Deliberately. Every species accepts losses, another replied. No, he said quietly. They're using them. That was the moment everything shifted. Inside the command core, a new projection formed, tracking not just surviving ships, but destroyed ones. And what it revealed was horrifying. Strategist, a subcommander said, his voice unsteady. The debris fields, they're forming patterns. Vakar stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the display. Scattered wreckage, fragments of destroyed human ships, drifting across the battlefield, weren't random. They were positioned, guided by the very chaos the humans had created. They're building obstacles, he realized, using their own losses to disrupt our movement. Across the fleet, alien ships began encountering unexpected resistance. Debris interfering with navigation, blocking firing lines, forcing slight adjustments that rippled through their perfectly synchronized formations. Tiny disruptions, but in a system built on perfection. Tiny disruptions were catastrophic. Our formation integrity is degrading, a commander reported. Minor deviations are compounding across the grid. Correct them, another snapped. We're trying, but the interference is increasing. On the battlefield, humanity's chaos was no longer just unpredictable. It was shaping the environment itself. Inside Horizon's Edge, the crew watched in awe as the effects unfolded. They're slowing down, the tactical officer said. Their formation, it's slipping. Ilara allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not slipping, she said softly. Breaking. She turned back to the viewport, her eyes reflecting the distant flashes of war. They built their entire system on control, she continued. Perfect positioning, perfect timing, perfect outcomes. Another explosion lit up the void. So we take that control away. Behind her, the bridge remained silent, every crew member beginning to understand what they were part of. This wasn't just a battle. It was a dismantling across the enemy fleet. Vakar stood rigid as the truth settled in. They are not fighting the fleet, he said slowly. They are fighting the system. And for the first time, that system was losing. On the battlefield, human ships, alone, unpredictable, and refusing to follow any rule ever written, tightened their invisible net. Phase 1 had been deception. Phase 2 was disruption. And Phase 3 had just begun. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, when the battlefield stopped belonging to the enemy. Not because their ships were destroyed, not because their weapons failed, but because, for the first time in their entire history, they didn't understand what was happening. Across the Carthan expanse, the once perfect geometry of the alien fleet had begun to distort. Lines that should have been flawless were bending. Angles that should have aligned were drifting apart. Ships that had once moved like a single, unified organism now hesitated. Fractional delays cascading into widening gaps. To most observers, it still looked like control. To those who knew the codex, it looked like decay. Their synchronization variance is increasing, a Thal analyst reported, his voice tight with disbelief. It's minor, but it's spreading. Impossible, a Varelian strategist said immediately. Their systems autocorrect deviations in real time. They are trying, the analyst replied, but the interference is compounding. On the main projection, the cause became clear. Human chaos had evolved. It was no longer just unpredictable movement. It was pressure. Constant, uneven, relentless pressure applied at points the enemy couldn't stabilize fast enough. They're not attacking targets, the analyst whispered. They're attacking timing. Inside the alien command core, the atmosphere had shifted. The calm certainty that had defined their species for millennia was gone, replaced by something colder, something unfamiliar. Status, Vakar demanded. Formation drift at 3.7%, a subcommander replied. Within acceptable parameters, but rising. Correct it. We are attempting to, strategist, but what? A pause. Then, the corrections are creating new deviations. Silence followed, because that should not have been possible. Every adjustment was supposed to reduce error, not multiply it. Vakar stepped closer to the central display, watching as the data unfolded in real time. They're forcing recursive instability, he said slowly. They introduce disruption we correct, and the correction becomes a new weakness. Across the battlefield, human ships darted in and out of engagement zones, striking not for destruction, but for imbalance. A single shot here, a sudden maneuver there, a near collision that forced an enemy vessel to adjust by a fraction of a degree. Insignificant actions, until they weren't. They're creating chain reactions, a commander said. Each minor disruption cascades through our formation. Then isolate the disruptions, another snapped. Segment the fleet. Contain the effect. Vakar's gaze sharpened. Yes, do it. At once, the alien fleet began dividing itself. Sections breaking off into independent clusters, each attempting to stabilize locally rather than across the entire formation. It was a logical solution. It was also exactly what humanity wanted. Inside Horizon's Edge, the shift was immediate. They're segmenting, the tactical officer reported. Multiple subformations forming across their grid. Alara nodded once. Finally, the officer frowned. Finally, they just gave up their greatest advantage, she said. Unity. She gestured to the display, where the once monolithic enemy fleet was now fractured into smaller, isolated groups. They don't realize it yet, she continued, but they just made themselves vulnerable. Behind her, another officer hesitated. Admiral, our own fleet is still completely desynchronized. We don't have the coordination to exploit that. Alara smiled faintly. We don't need coordination. She leaned forward, her voice low but sharp. We need instinct. Across the battlefield, the human ships reacted almost immediately, though no signal had been given. Because there was no signal to give, each captain, each pilot, each crew saw the same opportunity and acted. They're converging, a Thal observer said, stunned. But there's no central command. How are they aligning? They're not aligning, the Varelian strategist replied slowly, his voice losing its certainty. They're agreeing. Human ships began swarming the newly formed subgroups, not in organized waves, but in overlapping, unpredictable bursts of aggression. Small clusters of vessels descended on isolated enemy segments, striking from multiple angles without warning. No pattern, no rhythm, no warning. They're overwhelming localized sectors, an alien commander reported. Request permission to reintegrate fleet structure. Denied, another replied immediately. Reintegration will take too long. Maintain segmented control. That will leave units exposed. Exposure is preferable to systemic collapse. Vakar said nothing, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. On the battlefield, the consequences unfolded rapidly. A cluster of alien ships attempted to stabilize their formation, only to be hit from 3 different directions by human vessels that should never have been able to coordinate such an attack. Another group tried to retreat, only to find their path obstructed by drifting debris and unpredictable enemy movements. Every action they took was answered by something they couldn't predict. Inside Horizon's Edge, the tension had transformed into something sharper, focused. They're reacting slower, the tactical officer said. Decision latency increasing across all enemy sectors. Of course it is, Ilara replied. They're thinking. The officer blinked. Thinking. They've never had to before, she said quietly. Another explosion rippled across the void as an alien ship, caught between conflicting maneuvers, failed to adjust in time. It was a small loss, but it meant everything. They just lost a vessel, the officer said, almost disbelieving. Confirmed destruction. Across the galaxy, shock spread instantly. The enemy fleet lost a ship, a Thal analyst said, his voice barely above a whisper. That is statistically insignificant, another replied quickly. But no one believed it, because it wasn't about the loss. It was about how it happened, not through superior firepower, not through overwhelming force, but through confusion. Inside the alien command core, the impact was immediate. Damage reports incoming across multiple sectors, a subcommander said. Losses minimal but increasing. Stabilize, another snapped. Reassert control. We are trying, but the variables. The variables are irrelevant, he shouted. Follow the codex. And that was the problem. Vakar closed his eyes for a brief moment, because for the first time in his existence, the codex felt like a limitation. They are not bound by it, he said quietly. The room fell silent. And we are. No one responded, because no one could deny it. Out there in the chaos of battle, humanity moved freely, unrestricted by doctrine, unburdened by expectation, unafraid to make decisions that defied logic itself. And in doing so, they were winning. Not decisively, not yet, but undeniably. Inside Horizon's Edge, Ilara watched as another enemy cluster faltered under the pressure. Phase 2 is complete, she said. Her crew turned toward her, anticipation building. Admiral, what's Phase 3? Ilara's expression hardened, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Now, we stop confusing them. A pause. Then, we start breaking them. Outside, the battlefield shifted once more, because chaos had done its job, and what came next would be far more dangerous. The moment confusion stopped being the goal, it became a weapon. Across the fractured battlefield, something subtle began to change. The wild, erratic movements of the human fleet, once completely unpredictable, started to narrow, not into order, but into intention. To the untrained eye, it still looked like chaos. To those watching closely, it felt different. They're stabilizing, a Thal analyst said slowly, his voice uncertain. Not fully, but their movement variance is decreasing. That makes no sense, a Varelian strategist replied. They've abandoned structure entirely. Yes, the analyst said, eyes locked on the data. But now, it's like they're choosing when to be chaotic. That distinction changed everything. Inside the alien command core, Vakar stood rigid as the battlefield updated in real time. Human ships were no longer just disrupting. They were repeating certain behaviors. Not enough to form a pattern, but enough to suggest one. Do you see it? A subcommander asked cautiously. I do, Vakar replied. They are introducing controlled irregularity. The room fell silent, because that concept did not exist in the codex. They are limiting their randomness, another officer said. Why would they reduce their own advantage? Vakar's gaze sharpened. They are not reducing it. They are shaping it. On the battlefield, human ships began executing short bursts of coordinated strikes, small groups converging on isolated enemy segments, attacking with sudden precision before dissolving back into unpredictability. Not sustained coordination, just flashes of it, enough to hit harder, not enough to be predicted. They're creating micro-patterns, a commander reported. Temporary alignment windows, lasting less than 3 seconds. That's not enough time for predictive lock, another added. And too little consistency to model, a third finished. For the first time, the enemy had nothing to hold on to. Inside Horizon's Edge, the shift was deliberate. Timing windows holding at 2.8 seconds, the tactical officer said. We can push to 3, but anything longer risks pattern recognition. Keep it under 3, Ilara replied immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the battlefield, tracking the ebb and flow of human movement. Chaos got us inside their system, she continued. Now we use precision to tear it apart. Another officer leaned forward. Admiral, the fleet is starting to sink in bursts without direct communication. How is that even possible? Ilara allowed herself a faint smile. They don't need orders anymore. A beat. They understand the rhythm. Outside, the human fleet moved like a storm that had learned how to strike. A cluster of ships surged toward an isolated alien group, firing in perfect, devastating alignment for just a fraction of a moment. Then they scattered. Before the enemy could respond, before the system could adapt, they hit and vanish, a Thal observer whispered. There's no time to counter. Because the counter requires prediction, the Varelian strategist said, his voice tight. And they refuse to be predicted. Inside the alien command core, tension was no longer subtle. It was everywhere. Damage reports increasing, a subcommander said. Localized sectors are collapsing under repeated strikes. Then reinforce those sectors, another snapped. We can't reinforce fast enough. Their attack points keep shifting. Vakar stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. Then stop reacting. Silence fell instantly. All eyes turned to him. If we continue to chase their movements, we lose, he said. They are controlling the tempo of this battle. A pause. Re-establish central firing solutions. Ignore isolated attacks. Focus on large-scale elimination. But strategist, a commander protested, that will leave segments vulnerable. They are already vulnerable, Vakar interrupted coldly. At least this way we regain control. The order was executed. Across the alien fleet, smaller engagements were abandoned. Ships pulled back, attempting to reform into larger, more stable structures, prioritizing overall cohesion over localized survival. For a moment, it worked. They're stabilizing, the tactical officer aboard Horizon's Edge reported. Formation density increasing in central sectors. Ilara nodded slowly. Good. The officer frowned. Good. They're retreating into structure, she said. And structure is predictable. Her gaze hardened, which means she didn't need to finish. Across the battlefield, human ships reacted instantly. The moment the enemy began consolidating, the micro-pattern attacks intensified, striking at the edges of reforming formations, disrupting alignment before it could fully stabilize. They're not letting them rebuild, an observer shouted. Every time they try to regroup, the humans hit them again. Inside the alien command core, frustration began to bleed through discipline. They're anticipating our recovery attempts, a subcommander said. How are they predicting us? They're not predicting, Vakar said quietly. They're understanding. The realization hit like a shockwave, because understanding was something no system could counter. On the battlefield, the human fleet had shifted from chaos to something far more dangerous. Adaptation. They weren't just breaking the enemy's system anymore. They were learning it. They know how we respond, a commander said, his voice tight. Every time we adjust, they're already moving to counter it. Then change the response, another snapped. We are, but they change faster. Another explosion rippled across the void as a cluster of alien ships failed to complete formation alignment before being struck. Losses were still limited, but they were no longer negligible. Inside Horizon's Edge, the momentum was undeniable. They're slipping, the tactical officer said. We're forcing them into reactive cycles. Ilara exhaled slowly. Exactly where we want them. She stepped forward, her voice lowering. They spent 10,000 years perfecting a system that assumes the enemy will behave logically. Her eyes locked onto the shifting enemy formation. So we gave them chaos. Another explosion flared in the distance. Then we gave them something worse. The officer hesitated. What's worse than chaos? Ilara's answer came without hesitation. Choice. Because now, the enemy had options. And every option was wrong. Inside the alien command core, the pressure was mounting. Strategist, a subcommander, said carefully, "We are losing initiative." Vakar didn't respond immediately. He simply watched as his fleet, once perfect, once unstoppable, struggled to maintain cohesion against an opponent that refused to follow any rule. "They are forcing us to think like them," he said finally. A dangerous silence followed. "And we are failing." Across the battlefield, the human fleet pressed forward, not recklessly, not blindly, but with a growing confidence that was impossible to ignore. They were still outnumbered, still outgunned, still not supposed to win, and yet the balance was shifting. Inside Horizon's Edge, Ilara gave the next order. "Signal all ships." Her crew turned toward her. Phase 3 escalation. A pause. Then quietly, "Now we make them hesitate." Because hesitation was something the Codex had never accounted for. And once it appeared, everything would begin to fall apart. Hesitation did not exist in the Codex. It had never needed to. Every action had a correct response. Every scenario had a solution. Every outcome was already mapped long before the first shot was fired. There was no uncertainty, only execution. But now, there was a gap. Small, fragile, and spreading. Across the battlefield, the alien fleet moved with something dangerously new woven into its precision. Commands were still issued instantly. Ships still aligned with impossible accuracy. Weapons still fired with devastating power. But between action and response, there was a delay. Milliseconds, then seconds. And in war, governed by perfection, that was an eternity. "They're slowing," the tactical officer aboard Horizon's Edge said, his voice tight with disbelief. Response time increasing across all sectors. Ilara didn't look away from the display. "Not slowing," she said quietly, doubting. Behind her, the bridge fell silent. Because doubt was lethal. Outside, a cluster of human ships surged toward an isolated enemy segment. It was a move they had made before, fast, aggressive, unpredictable. Normally, the response would have been immediate. Counterfire calculated, angles adjusted, threat neutralized. This time, the alien ships hesitated, just long enough. The human vessels struck first. A burst of concentrated fire tore through shielding that should have held. One ship fractured under the impact, its hull splitting as energy cascaded through its core. It wasn't a catastrophic loss, but it was unmistakable. "They delayed firing by 1.2 seconds, a Thal analyst said, stunned. "Why would they delay?" "They didn't delay," the Varelian strategist replied, his voice hollow. "They questioned." Inside the alien command core, the shift was undeniable. "Why was that sector late to respond?" a subcommander demanded. "Conflicting threat assessments," another replied quickly. Their attack vector matched two previously observed patterns, each with different optimal responses. "So you chose neither," the commander snapped. "We attempted to recalculate." "You do not recalculate during engagement." Vakar raised a hand. Silence fell instantly. "That is exactly what they want," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. "They have introduced ambiguity into our system. Multiple viable interpretations where there should only be one." He stepped closer to the central display, watching as new engagements unfolded. "And now we hesitate." Across the fleet, it was happening everywhere. Human ships would approach, sometimes aggressively, sometimes deceptively slow, and the alien response would flicker. Not failure, not collapse, just uncertainty. "They're exploiting decision conflict," a commander said. "Our systems can't prioritize fast enough when multiple optimal solutions exist." "Then reduce the variables," another snapped. "Simplify engagement criteria." "We can't. That would reduce overall efficiency." "And what is our efficiency now?" the first shot back. No one answered. Because the numbers were falling. Inside Horizon's Edge, the effect was clear. "They're second-guessing," the tactical officer said. "Every move we make forces them to evaluate instead of react." Alara nodded. "That's the crack." She stepped forward, her voice low and precise. "Push it." Across the human fleet, the change was immediate. Micro-pattern strikes intensified. But now, they were layered with deception. Ships began mimicking previous attack behaviors before abruptly shifting mid-execution. Others repeated earlier maneuvers, but with slight, critical variations. Similar, but not identical. Familiar, but wrong. "They're creating false recognition triggers," a Thal observer whispered. "The enemy thinks they've seen the pattern before, but it doesn't resolve the same way. That forces re-evaluation," the Varelian strategist said, his voice tight, "which causes delay." "And delay," the analyst finished softly, "gets them killed." On the battlefield, another alien ship faltered, its weapons firing too late as a human vessel slipped past its defensive arc and struck from an unexpected angle. Then another, and another. Losses were still controlled, but they were accelerating. Inside the alien command core, the pressure was becoming unbearable. "Strategist, we are experiencing cascading hesitation across multiple sectors," a subcommander reported. "Decision latency increasing exponentially." "Override it," another officer demanded. "Force immediate response protocols." "That will increase error rates." "Error is preferable to inaction." Vakar said nothing, because for the first time, he didn't know which was worse. "They have forced us into a paradox," he said finally. The room fell silent. "If we act too quickly, we choose incorrectly." His gaze hardened. "If we hesitate, we die." Across the battlefield, the human fleet pressed harder, not with overwhelming force, but with relentless pressure. Every movement designed to provoke a decision. Every attack crafted to create doubt. Inside Horizon's Edge, the crew felt it. The shift. The momentum. "They're breaking," the tactical officer said, almost in disbelief. "We're actually breaking them." Alara exhaled slowly. "Not yet." Her eyes remained locked on the enemy formation. "But they're close." Another officer turned toward her. "Admiral, if we keep this up, we can maintain pressure indefinitely. They'll collapse under their own system." Alara shook her head. "No." The word was quiet, but absolute. "They'll adapt." The officer frowned. "Adapt? To this?" "They have to," she said, "or they wouldn't have survived this long." A pause. "Which means they're about to do something dangerous." As if on cue, the alien fleet began to shift. Not into tighter formations, not into defensive postures, but into something new. "Strategist," a subcommander said, confusion evident. "We are receiving override commands across the fleet." "Confirmed," another added. "Predictive systems are being disabled." Silence. Then, "That cannot be correct." But it was. One by one, across the alien armada, the systems that had defined their dominance for millennia went dark. "They're abandoning the codex," a Thal analyst whispered, shock rippling through every observer network. "No," the Varelian strategist said slowly. "They're trying to survive." Inside the alien command core, Vakar stood unmoving as the final system shut down. "Enough," he said. His voice carried something new, something human. "If we cannot outthink them." A pause. "Then we will meet them where they are." Across the battlefield, the effect was immediate. Alien ships, once perfect, once predictable, began to move differently. Less precise, less controlled, but faster, more aggressive. "They're changing behavior patterns," the tactical officer aboard Horizon's Edge reported. "Their response times just dropped, no hesitation." Alara's expression darkened. "Of course they did." The officer looked at her. "Isn't that what we wanted?" She shook her head slowly. "No." Her voice dropped. "That's what we feared." Because chaos was no longer humanity's advantage. Now, it belonged to both sides. Outside, the battlefield transformed once again. Two forces, both unpredictable, both refusing to follow the rules, colliding in a war that no longer had structure, no longer had certainty, and no longer had limits. Inside Horizon's Edge, Alara straightened, her voice cutting through the tension. Signal all ships. Her crew turned toward her, waiting. Phase 4. A pause. Then, now we find out who survives without rules. And far beyond the battlefield, as the galaxy watched in stunned silence, the unthinkable became real. Humanity had forced the most advanced fleet in existence to become human. The moment both sides abandoned the rules, the war became something else entirely. There were no clean formations anymore. No predictable firing arcs. No synchronized waves of attack. The battlefield dissolved into raw motion, ships weaving, colliding, striking, retreating, and surging forward again in a storm of instinct and survival. For the first time in galactic history, war was no longer controlled. It was felt. Across the observation networks, silence had turned into something heavier. Not confusion anymore. Fear. They've equalized, a Thal analyst said quietly. Both fleets are now operating without predictive frameworks. That is not equalization, the Varelian strategist replied, his voice strained. That is escalation. Because without rules, there were no limits. Inside Horizon's edge, the bridge trembled as nearby explosions lit the void. Human ships were no longer dancing around danger. They were diving straight into it, engaging enemy vessels at distances that made survival almost impossible. They're matching us, the tactical officer said. Enemy ships are responding instantly now. No hesitation, no delay. Another impact shook the hull. Shields at 60%. Ilara stood firm, her expression sharpened by something deeper than strategy. Understanding. They had to do it, she said. They couldn't survive otherwise. The officer looked at her. So now what? Ilara's eyes flicked across the battlefield, where alien ships now moved with aggressive unpredictability, firing without perfect alignment, maneuvering without flawless synchronization. They've stepped into chaos, she said. A beat. But they don't know how to live in it. Outside, the difference was subtle, but critical. Alien ships moved faster now, more reactive, less constrained. But their actions lacked something humanity had built over centuries of conflict. Experience. They're overcorrecting, Ilara continued. Every move is immediate, but not all of them are right. As if to prove her point, an alien vessel veered sharply to avoid an incoming strike, only to collide with drifting debris from an earlier battle. Its shields flared violently as it spun out of position, momentarily exposed. A human ship seized the opening instantly. One shot. Direct hit. The alien vessel fractured. They're making mistakes, the tactical officer said, almost in disbelief. Of course they are, Ilara replied. They've never fought like this before. Across the battlefield, the consequences began to stack. Alien ships, once flawless, now clashed with one another's movements. Defensive systems misaligned. Firing solutions overlapped inefficiently. Maneuvers that should have complemented each other now interfered. Not constantly, but enough. And in chaos, enough was all it took. Inside the alien command core, the shift was violent. Collision in Sector 12. Friendly fire reported in Sector 9. Navigation conflicts increasing across all clusters. Voices overlapped, no longer calm, no longer precise. Vakar stood at the center, his gaze locked on the collapsing order around him. This is inefficient, a subcommander said, his voice strained. We are sustaining avoidable losses. Yes, Vakar said quietly. We are. Another explosion rippled across the projection. Then restore the codex, another officer snapped. Re-enable predictive systems. And return to hesitation. Vakar replied sharply. Silence followed, because they all knew what that meant. Delay, doubt, death. We cannot go back, he said. But forward was killing them. Across the battlefield, humanity pressed harder. They didn't just survive the chaos. They moved through it. Ships twisted through narrow gaps, using debris, momentum, and even enemy fire as tools rather than obstacles. Pilots made impossible calls and trusted them, not because they were certain, but because they had to be. Inside Horizon's edge, the cost was undeniable. Casualty reports incoming, the tactical officer said, his voice tight. We've lost multiple ships across all sectors. Another alarm blared. Hull integrity dropping. Port side taking sustained damage. The ship shuddered violently. For a moment, the bridge lights flickered. Ilara braced herself against the console, steadying her breath. This was the price. This was always the price. Damage control teams, hold the line, she ordered calmly. Then softer. Stay with me. Because this kind of war didn't forgive hesitation. Another officer turned toward her, eyes wide. Admiral, at this rate, even if we keep the advantage, we won't have enough ships left to finish this. Ilara didn't answer immediately. She watched the battlefield, watched the chaos, watched the cost, and then she nodded. I know. The words were quiet, but final. Across the void, a human cruiser erupted into light, torn apart by a sudden barrage. Another ship spiraled out of control, its engines failing as it drifted into darkness. Losses, real, heavy, and rising. Inside the alien command core, the same truth was unfolding. We are taking significant damage, a subcommander reported. Loss rates increasing beyond acceptable thresholds. Then concentrate fire, another shouted. End this. But there was no clean way to end it anymore. No decisive strike. No perfect solution. Just attrition. And humanity was still there, still fighting, still adapting. Vakar's gaze hardened as he studied the data. They are willing to pay the cost, he said. A pause. And we are not. The realization hit like a shockwave. Because that was the difference. Across the battlefield, the human fleet, battered, bleeding, and still refusing to break, pushed deeper into the chaos. Not because it was optimal, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. Inside Horizon's edge, Ilara closed her eyes for just a second, then opened them again. Clear, focused, resolved. Signal all remaining units, she said. Her crew turned toward her, tension rising. Prepare for final execution. The tactical officer hesitated. Admiral, final execution? Ilara nodded. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. We can't win this by outlasting them. A beat. We win by ending it. The officer's expression shifted. Ending it how? Ilara looked out at the battlefield one last time. At the chaos. At the losses. At the war that had consumed everything it touched. And then she said it. We break everything. Silence filled the bridge. Because there were only two ways that could end. Victory or annihilation. Outside, the human fleet began to shift again. Subtle at first, almost unnoticeable beneath the chaos. But it was happening. The final move. The one that would decide everything. And across the galaxy, no one could predict what came next. There are moments in war when everything narrows, when the noise fades, when the chaos stops feeling random, and something far more dangerous takes its place. Intent. Across the battlefield. The storm of movement, the collisions, the desperate maneuvers, the constant exchange of fire began to shift again. Not into order, but into alignment. They are changing, a Thal analyst whispered, his voice barely audible. Both fleets, something's happening. On the projection, it was almost invisible at first. Human ships, scattered and battered, began adjusting their vectors, not toward safety, not toward retreat, but toward each other. They're converging, the Varelian strategist said slowly. Why would they cluster now? That makes them easier targets. No, the analyst replied, his tone tightening. Not clustering, condensing. Inside Horizon's edge, the bridge was quieter than it had been since the battle began. Not calm, but resolved. Signal confirmed, the communications officer said. All remaining units acknowledging. The tactical officer swallowed hard as the display updated. Admiral, they're all moving towards central engagement space. That's the most dangerous zone on the field. Ilara didn't hesitate. I know. Her voice was steady, unshaken. This is where it ends. Behind her, no one spoke, because they understood. There would be no second attempt, no fallback plan, no retreat. Across the void, human ships, damaged, outnumbered, barely holding together, began converging into a tightening sphere at the heart of the battlefield. Not in perfect formation, not synchronized, but unified. And that was something entirely different. Inside the alien command core, confusion flared. "They're consolidating," a subcommander reported. "All remaining human vessels are moving into a single engagement cluster." "That is a fatal error," another officer said immediately. "Concentrated targets maximize our fire efficiency." "Yes," Vakar said quietly. "Yes, it does." But something in his voice had changed. "Because this didn't feel like a mistake." "Prepare full-spectrum barrage," a commander ordered. "And this now." Across the alien fleet, weapons began to charge, massive arrays aligning toward the converging human formation. For the first time since the battle began, the outcome seemed clear again. "They've abandoned unpredictability," a Thal observer said. "This is their final stand." "No," the Varelian strategist murmured. "This is something else." On the battlefield, the human fleet completed its convergence. A loose sphere of ships, some barely functional, others scarred and flickering with damage, hovered in the dead center of the enemy's firing grid. Perfectly exposed, perfectly vulnerable. Inside Horizon's edge, the final moments stretched. "Enemy weapons at full charge," the tactical officer said. "We're inside total convergence range. Survival probability." "Don't," Ilara said softly. The officer stopped. Because numbers didn't matter anymore. Ilara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the growing storm of energy surrounding them. "Broadcast to all ships," she said. Her voice carried across the fleet, calm, human, unbreakable. "We knew this wasn't a fair fight." A pause. "We knew we weren't supposed to win." Around her, the crew stood still, listening. "But we're still here." Another pause. "And that means so are they." Outside, the alien fleet completed its targeting alignment. Hundreds of ships, thousands of weapons, all focused on a single point: fire. The command echoed across the void, and the galaxy lit up. A storm of energy surged toward the human fleet, overlapping beams, perfectly calculated trajectories, enough firepower to erase anything caught within it. It was absolute. It was overwhelming. It was too much. Inside Horizon's edge, the tactical officer's voice broke through the silence. "Impact in 3, 2, 1. Now," Ilara said. Across the human fleet, everything changed. Ships didn't scatter. They didn't evade. They surged. Every remaining vessel accelerated forward, engines flaring to maximum output, as they drove straight into the incoming barrage. "They're charging a fire," a Thal analyst shouted. "That's impossible. They'll be annihilated." "Yes," the Varelian strategist whispered. "They will." But that wasn't the point. At the last possible moment, the human ships split. Not outward, not randomly, but through. They cut into the overlapping layers of energy, slipping between trajectories that had been calculated to converge, not to adapt. "They're using the overlap gaps," the analyst realized. The firing grid wasn't designed for dynamic penetration. Beams that should have destroyed them instead crossed past, striking empty space, or worse, each other. Inside the alien command core, alarm screamed. Multiple friendly fire incidents. Our own weapons are intersecting, shields collapsing in central sectors. "How is this happening?" Vakar stared at the projection and understood. "They turned our precision against us," he said quietly. The battlefield erupted. Alien ships, caught in their own perfectly calculated crossfire, took massive damage as overlapping energy tore through their formations. Defensive systems, designed for external threats, struggled to compensate for internal impact vectors. Chaos, but not human chaos. Their chaos, and they weren't ready for it. Inside Horizon's edge, the crew watched in stunned disbelief as the impossible unfolded. "They're hitting themselves," the tactical officer said. "Their entire firing grid is collapsing." Ilara's voice was steady, "Because it was never meant to handle something like us." Outside, human ships, those that survived the charge, burst through the collapsing grid, emerging inside the enemy's formation. Too close, too fast, too unpredictable. "They've breached inner defense layers," an alien commander shouted. "We can't target them at this range." Another explosion rippled across the fleet. Then another. Then dozens. The perfect formation was gone. Inside the alien command core, Vakar stood motionless as the realization settled in. "We built a system that could defeat anything predictable," he said. A pause. "But not this." Across the battlefield, the alien fleet began to fracture, ships breaking apart, formations collapsing, command structures failing under the weight of their own precision turned against them. And at the center of it all, humanity, still fighting, still moving, still refusing to follow any rule. Inside Horizon's Edge, Ilara exhaled slowly. "It's done," the tactical officer whispered. "They're breaking." Ilara shook her head. Not yet. Her eyes remained fixed on the battlefield. War doesn't end when the enemy starts losing a beat. It ends when they stop fighting. Outside, the final stage had begun. The enemy fleet, once unstoppable, once perfect, was unraveling. And for the first time, victory was no longer impossible. It was real. War for 10,000 years had always ended the same way. One side reached the inevitable conclusion. The other accepted it. There were no last stands, no desperate gambles, no final, chaotic struggles. Because once the outcome was known, resistance only increased loss, and loss without purpose was inefficient. So fleets surrendered. They powered down. They survived. That was how war worked. Until humanity. Across the shattered remains of the battlefield, the alien fleet drifted in fragments. Once perfect formations had dissolved into scattered clusters of damaged ships, their coordination broken, their systems failing to recover. And yet, they were still there. "They're not retreating," a Thal analyst said, his voice trembling with disbelief. "They've lost structural cohesion, their predictive systems are offline, and they're still engaging." "That is irrational," another replied. "No," the Varelian strategist said quietly. "It's new. Because, for the first time in their history, they didn't know how to stop." Inside the alien command core, the silence was suffocating. Damage reports scrolled endlessly. Systems failed one after another. Entire sectors of the fleet had gone dark. But no surrender signal had been issued. No disengagement protocol activated. "Strategist," a subcommander said carefully, "we have reached loss thresholds. Standard doctrine requires withdrawal." Vakar didn't answer. He simply stared at the battlefield, at the chaos, at the destruction, at the enemy that refused to behave. "They are still advancing," another officer said. "Even now, even after everything." The words carried something unfamiliar, something close to fear. "We cannot stabilize," the first commander continued. "We cannot reform. If we remain—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Vakar finally spoke. "Why?" The single word cut through the room. The officers hesitated. "Strategist?" "Why are they still fighting?" Vakar asked. No one answered. Because there was no calculation for that. No variable. No model. Across the battlefield, the answer was visible. Human ships, damaged, outnumbered, some barely holding together, continued to push forward. Not recklessly, not blindly, but with something the galaxy had never quantified. Will. Inside Horizon's Edge, the bridge was quiet again. Not from calm, from exhaustion. "We've broken their formation completely," the tactical officer said. "Remaining enemy units are scattered and operating independently." Another officer spoke, voice low. "We've won." The words hung in the air, heavy, unreal, because they weren't supposed to be true. Ilara didn't respond immediately. She looked out at the battlefield, at the wreckage, at the drifting debris, at the ships still moving through the aftermath of something that should have been impossible. "Not yet," she said finally. Her voice was softer now, but no less certain. "They haven't stopped." As if to prove her point, an alien vessel, damaged, isolated, accelerated toward a nearby human ship, weapons firing in a final, desperate strike. No coordination, no calculation, just action. "They're still engaging," the tactical officer confirmed. No signs of surrender. Ilara closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them. and made the hardest decision of the war. "Open a channel," she said. The communications officer blinked. "A channel to the enemy?" "Yes." A pause. "Now." Across the broken battlefield, a signal cut through the chaos, broadband unencrypted, impossible to ignore. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, "They're receiving," the officer said. Alara stepped forward and spoke. "This is Admiral Alara Vance of the human fleet." Her voice carried across the void, translated, transmitted, understood. "We are still here." A pause. "You are still here." Another pause. And then, "This war is over." Inside the alien command core, every system froze. I turned toward Vakar. The transmission echoed through the chamber. "This war is over." The words didn't fit. They didn't align. Because the outcome had not been formally calculated. Victory had not been declared. The Codex had not concluded. And yet, the war had ended. "How can they say that?" a subcommander whispered. "We have not surrendered." Vakar didn't answer. Because he was still watching, still thinking, still trying to understand something that could not be modeled. Across the battlefield, the human fleet held position. They didn't advance. They didn't fire. They waited. "They've stopped attacking," an officer reported. "Why?" another demanded. "They have the advantage." Because Vakar said slowly, "They are choosing to." The realization settled over the room like a shockwave. Choice. Not calculation. Not inevitability. Choice. He stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the projection of the battlefield. On the enemy that had broken every rule. On the species that had turned chaos into strategy. On the force that had done the impossible. "They are not waiting for surrender," he said. "They are offering it." Silence followed, because that had never happened before. War was not ended by the victor's mercy. It was ended by the loser's acceptance. Until now, Vakar closed his eyes. For the first time in his existence, he felt it. Not confusion, not uncertainty, but something deeper. Respect. "They could have destroyed us," a subcommander said quietly. "Yes," Vakar replied. "They still can." Another pause. "Strategist, what do we do?" The question hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Vakar opened his eyes and made a decision no system could have predicted. "Stand down," he said. Across the alien fleet, weapons powered down. Engines dimmed. Ships slowed. Not because they were forced to. Not because they had no choice. But because they chose to stop. On the battlefield, the shift was immediate. "They're disengaging," the tactical officer aboard Horizon's Edge said, disbelief in his voice. "All enemy units standing down." The bridge remained silent, because no one quite believed it, until Alara nodded. "It's over." The words were quiet, but they carried across everything. Across the ships, across the battlefield, across the galaxy. War was over. Outside, the remains of two fleets drifted in the aftermath of something that would be studied for generations. Not for its destruction, but for what it had changed. Across the observation networks, silence turned into something else. Understanding. "They rewrote it," the Thal analyst whispered. "Everything we know about war." The Virelian strategist didn't respond immediately, because he was still watching the human fleet, still trying to understand. "They didn't just win," he said finally. "They changed the rules." No, he realized. They removed them. Inside Horizon's Edge, the crew stood in quiet disbelief. Some laughed. Some cried. Some simply stared at the stars, unable to process what they had just survived. Alara remained still, looking out at the battlefield one last time. "We didn't win because we were stronger," she said softly. "We won because we were willing to fight a war no one else would." A pause. And then, her voice softened further. "We were willing to end it." Far beyond the battlefield, across countless worlds and civilizations, one truth began to spread. Humanity was not the most advanced, not the most powerful, not the most predictable. They were something far more dangerous. They were adaptable. And in a universe built on certainty, they were unstoppable. If this story kept you on edge till the very end, Don't forget to comment and share it with others. And stay tuned to HFY Global Tales for more stories where humanity refuses to lose.